Hello and welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And as always, we're sitting down with...
I'm Dr. Rob Citino, the senior historian here at the museum.
Dr. Christelle Lefaucheur, research historian here at the museum with the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy.
And today our special guest is Larry DeCures, Army veteran and curator here at the National World War II Museum.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome. Good to have you here, Larry. Today we'll be discussing the movie 12 O'Clock High, which was produced in 1949 by 20th Century Fox. The film was directed by Henry King and produced by Darrell F. Zanuck himself. It stars Gregory Peck as General Frank Savage, Hugh Marlowe as Colonel Ben Gately, Gary Merrill as Colonel Keith Davenport, Millard Mitchell as General Pritchard, and Dean Jagger, who won an Academy Award as Best Supporting Actor in the role of Major Harvey Stoval. A huge commercial success in its day, the movie proved to be very popular to veterans of the European bombing campaign for its accuracy. 12 O'Clock High became required viewing material for all U.S. service academies for examples of leadership. So I guess the first question that we have to ask is, really the whole reason we're here is, how accurate is 12 O'Clock High?
Well, Seth, from what I've read, for the opening of the movie, Curtis LeMay was asked, "What do you think?" And he simply said, "Well, I can't see anything wrong with it." So, I guess that's a pretty strong.
It's a ringing endorsement.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I think we're looking at a realistic movie, but I think when we say realism, we have to remember what we're talking realistic about. This is a war film, but there's really not all that much war in it in terms of whether you look at a war film largely for how many scenes of combat there are. There's some great footage, and everybody loves the raw footage, some which was taken from Luftwaffe cameras, German cameras apparently. But really this is I think it is a realistic movie about the stresses and strains of being under fire in combat, but in general the stresses and strains of being a leader, the person that others look to when a decision has to be made. It's draining, and it takes its toll of the major characters in this film.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you're looking at it from a historical accuracy point of view, in terms of what the movie is about, in that it's depicting the story of the 918th Bomb Group. Well, there was no 918th Bomb Group, so that's in that respect, it's not accurate at all. But the actions and the scenes that are portrayed in this movie, for the most part, I'd say about 95% of them are based off of actual historical events. The names have been changed, but the events themselves are dead ringers for what actually happened at certain bases and on certain missions during the war. So in that regard, it's extremely accurate.
And I would add that Director King's effort to, in collaboration with the Air Force, that granted him personnel and access to retired B-17th and so on, and being able to film in Elging's airfield and something like that gives a feel to the movie that feels realistic, although I have some issues about the depiction of individuals. We can talk about that in a minute.
Pritchard in here, for example, talking about, we said that some of it's patterned after real characters. Pritchard is obviously patterned after Ira Aker, who was in charge of the strategic bombing campaign during its infancy, and it's obvious it's from its infancy to its lowest point around the end of 1942 and end of 1943. So I do find this it's accurate. There's no Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan seen as an accurate film, too. There's no actual Private Ryan. So names are changed, and there's no actual 918th Bomb Group. I still think you wind up with a pretty good film and a pretty good illustration of the time and the place.
Yeah. I think it kind of illustrates the sweating it out. Whereas a combat film, you're in a foxhole, or you're, when you're out there actually doing the job, there's not time for all this, pacing around and drinking a gallon of coffee and smoking cigarettes. That's what's cool about, I think, all the briefing scenes you see in this and the closed-door conversations between the leadership. It's these guys are just sweating it out, and they're just, like, high on stress.
Although what's interesting is that after Zanuck gave the script to the Air Force, they asked him to redact a lot of scenes where the officers were drinking alcohol, and strongly suggested that they should replace them with drinking coffee or smoking a cigarette. So in terms of accuracy about sweating and...
It's a well-known fact. You got that. You came back from the mission for a scotch. That was one of the things you received when you got back from the mission.
I would say that's Air Force PR more than anything else. because I remember talking with Colonel Bud Anderson, who was a P-51 fighter ace and one of the more famous fighter aces of all time. He named his airplane, his P-51, Old Crow. And he told me, he said, yeah, I like to tell my Baptist friends that I named it after the wisest bird in the air, the crow. He says, but all my real friends know that I named it after my favorite bottle of booze. And he said that after every mission, they'd go back to their base, and the first thing they'd do after debriefing was to go to the O Club, and they drink. And I remember him saying, I said, well, how often was it? And he just looked at me and he says, we did a lot of drinking.
Yeah.
Look, available alcohol in a high-stress job. I mean, everyone knows that. You put those two things together and you're going to get drinking to excess, and I'm sure that did happen. You go to bed with the Air Force, so to speak, Christelle, that you ask them to look at the script so you can say the Air Force looked at it. You're almost always going to hear back from, their public affairs officer, some scene they didn't like, something that they felt might cast aspersions on the service. So no surprise to hear that they wanted to redact the alcohol out of 12 O'Clock High.
Also, the MPWA, the Motion Picture Association, asked Zanuck to take off Son of the Bitch, and also asked them for the painting of the nose that they should be, PG-13 appropriate.
As opposed to the real life.
Yes, they didn't want too explicit imagery on the nose. So there's a few little things like that, of course, have been redacted. But altogether, and also I think we should mention the two writers who had hands-on experience as pilots' assistants. Somebody has to take it.
Well, they were pilots. At least Bernie Lay was. Of course, and let's just kind of step back a little bit. This movie was based off of a book.
Right.
And the book was written by Bernie Lay and Cy Bartlett, these two fellows who knew each other when they spent time in the 8th Air Force together. And Bernie Lay is a pretty interesting character in that he was a writer, and he was in the it would be the Army Air Corps at that time. He was in the Army Air Corps in I don't want to state the year because I don't frankly remember, and I don't want to be said that I'm wrong. But anyhow, he was in the Air Corps before World War II, and he was a pilot, and he had a penchant for writing. He had a flair for writing. He was good at it. And in 1942, when the Air Corps became the Army Air Forces, General Aker literally grabbed him in the hallway and said, hey, you want to come with me? And Lay had no idea what the hell he was talking about. He said, yeah, sure, I'll go with you. And he had no clue where he was going. And, of course, Aker had pulled him aside and said, later, you're coming with me, we're going to England, and we're going to start a bombing group, or bombing unit. And, of course, that became the 8th Air Force. So he was one of the first guys in the 8th Air Force, and he was one of the, I don't want to say founding members, but he kind of was. He was one of the founding members of the Air Force, or 8th Air Force. And as such, was there from the beginning, really up until 1944. And the reason for that being is because he got shot down. But he was a PR guy for all intents and purposes, and he really wanted to fly. And one of the things that he kept pushing for was combat time. He wanted combat time because he felt like he needed to do it. And two, because he wasn't a fool, he knew that that's where good material lay in terms of stories. So he was sent to Thorpe Abbotts in August 1943, and he trained with the 100th Bomb Group, who most people have heard of as the Bloody 100th. And his first mission that he flew was a tough one. It was August 17th, 1943, to Regensburg. Yep. And it was a double strike with Schweinfurt-Regensburg, which is depicted in the film. Strangely enough, though, the part of that mission that they depict in the film is Schweinfurt, and not Regensburg.
Right.
And he was on Regensburg.
I think Schweinfurt had more cachet amongst. I think the American public knew that raid better. It'd have been a disaster. It has more of a more striking name in German. By the way, Seth, I'll just throw in my vote for the book. This is a great movie. I have no problem with the movie. We'll be talking about all its good points. But I think the book is even more successful. So this is really a story of kind of interior monologue of you talking to yourself of what am I doing here? What's my job? How can I carry out my task better? How can I lead these guys under me? And, of course, you can do that in a book better. You can write a complete paragraph, interior monologue, unless you want to do the sort of corny voiceover, which I know most directors aren't really happy about doing voiceover because it obviously is, you're trying to ape the book. But the book, I think, goes into even more detail on some of these leadership points, some of these stress points. I think the book, in effect, captures this material probably even more effectively than cinema. If this movie were largely action, then sometimes I'd just rather see the movie, in the hands of a really skilled director. You'd rather see that visual stylist. But here, this is not what that's about, and I think it really made a fine movie. It made it a really excellent book.
I agree. And I remember watching this as a kid, and as a kid I was really disappointed because there wasn't a lot of combat scenes. As an 8-year-old, 10-year-old watching this, I was like, well, this movie sucks because there's not a lot of combat. But as I got older, and the more I studied about the war, and the more I got to know the people that actually fought in it, I realized how really good this movie is and how accurate it is.
I'm pushing 60, but I still have the mind of a 10-year-old boy, so I want to say every now and then I really like to watch an action-packed film as well.
I have the maturity of a 10-year-old boy. But
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I would agree with Rob that the book, because there's more interiority, I think works better. And for me, this is one of the weaknesses of the film, that the film tries to convey the internal turmoil and the stress that Gregory Peck is supposed to depict. But for me, it didn't quite work. And at the end when he gets catatonic, it's a little trite.
Over the top.
Well, it doesn't quite work because I think it's sudden. He's very successful, and then he struggles, and then he get them on board, and then suddenly he goes to the plan and he can't. And there's not a lot of building up to that, which I think in the book is way more effectively depicted.
Signpost. I would say
Yes.
signposting.
Yes,
You have
like
little
of signpost.
indications that something's going to happen. You're not quite sure, but
Yeah.
something's going to happen. I think the book, just by definition, the book is able to do that more effectively than the film.
I can definitely see your point. There are instances in the movie where you do see Savage start to crack before he does have a nervous breakdown. That's what happens. But you can see him, and in particular, there's the scene where they're on the raid to Schweinfurt, and Cobb, his air executive, his second in command, his plane gets hit directly by flak, and the aircraft explodes, and there are no survivors. And you see him in the movie. He pulls his oxygen mask off very quickly, and he wipes his face off because he's sweating, and he's very clearly distressed by what he just saw. So you can see him slowly starting to trickle down.
Cobb's the tough guy. Cobb's the tough guy.
Cobb is the guy that was based off of Colonel Tibbets.
That's right.
Or General Tibbets.
So
He meets him in the bar. Yeah.
Going back to the scene you just described, Seth, I read that this was one of the scenes where originally in the screenplay he was supposed to do the same thing and then start lighting a cigarette, which of course the Air Force, the technical advisor, was A, you're not going to sweat at that altitude because it's really cold, and B, there's no way you can light a cigarette. So they cut the cigarette lighting scenes, but then you still see him sweating. Is it possible to sweat at
It's
that altitude?
absolutely possible.
We're asking
Okay.
the authorities here, Christelle. Let's see.
It's
let's see what
absolutely.
Seth
I
and Larry
mean,
have to say.
you got to look at it, and Larry, jump in anytime. The temperature at 25,000 plus minus a few thousand feet is anywhere from 50 to 60 degrees below zero.
Yeah, you lose about 2 degrees of temperature for every 1,000 feet of altitude you gain above sea level. So these guys are, they're highly agitated, stressed out, and they're scared. And they absolutely did sweat at that altitude. A lot of these guys talk about they had insulated flight suits or electrically heated flight suits. And a lot of times the sweat would they would get shocked because they were sweating in these suits because of the moisture. It doesn't sound natural, but you can sweat in the cold.
So the sweat is possible, but not the cigarette.
That I don't know.
Yeah, that I can't comment on that. I've never been at 25 grand.
Yeah,
an
no,
open,
unpressurized aircraft.
plane.
I can't.
I would imagine it would be kind of difficult to do, but I mean, sweating at 60 below zero, 50 below zero, yeah, it's possible. They did it. But yeah, I mean, it has its high points and it has its low points. I mean, it's to me, it's a fantastic film. But and one of the things that I find that is really accurate in this movie are like we talked about, some of the portrayals of the scenes were portrayals of actual events. Getting back to Bernie Lay, Bartlett was obviously a writer on it too, but Bernie Lay he was the mastermind behind this whole thing, the movie and the book. And the scene, one of the opening scenes in the movie, not the opening scene, which is incredibly awesome, but one of the opening scenes in the movie is where Colonel Davenport, who is, of course, Chip Overacker, who was the CEO of the 306 bomb group, 306 bombardment group. He is called into a meeting with, when in reality it would have been General Aker, and in the movie it's General Pritchard. Right. And in reality, Bernie Lay was there for that meeting. He was in the room. He saw it go down, and apparently he and Bartlett, after a couple days after all this went down, they got together and said, man, this would make a really good story. Because Overacker was, of course, like in the movie, he was relieved of command right then and there. And he was replaced with Frank Armstrong, who, of course, Frank Savage, and this is really it's a lot of Franks, Frank Savage, Gregory Peck's character is based off of Armstrong, who did come in and, quote, save the day, if you will, with 306.
What about this? So we're talking about accuracy and whether you can sweat or smoke in a cigarette. What about the bomb group commander going out on missions? That's at his discretion. So they said to Gregory Peck at one point, you don't really have to still be flying out on every mission. So bomb group commander has the prerogative to go out on missions if he chooses, but doesn't have to. Would that be a correct way of stating it?
Yes, and yes and no. I mean, they were not necessarily required to fly the 30, initially 25 and then 30 and 35 missions. They weren't required to do that, but they did that. Good leaders would do that anyway. And
I understand that. You don't want to say, hey, guys, go ahead. See you when you get back.
You don't do anything you wouldn't do yourself. But no, I mean, that was very common for not every mission, no.
Pritchard says to Davenport, Pritchard says to Savage at one point, you're still going out on every mission. He thought maybe that was a sign that he was starting to get Davenported, that he was getting too tied up with his men, too caring for them too much, loving them too much, perhaps, and thus not becoming as effective a leader. I thought that was an interesting point that the film makes. That you want an officer, you want a commander who has some care for the lives of his men. But then again, given what you're doing, which is you're not running a factory, you're fighting a war. Given what you're doing, that can actually be counterproductive. As humane as we would say it is 95% of the time, the 5% of the time that you're at war, you can actually get people in trouble. When he refuses to punish Zimmerman. Mm-hmm. Zimmerman makes a navigational error. The bomb group gets there. Was it 3 minutes too late? The flak's already been alerted. They lose a bunch of planes when they shouldn't have lost anybody.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was a little over the top, the way they dealt with that. Davenport knew his men so well. He knew this guy was going to be so broken up about it, he was going to kill himself.
Right.
I mean, that was kind of ridiculous to me. But
well, I thought the reasoning behind his suicide, of course, his parents were German. They were Bundist. They were part of that pro-Nazi organization in the United States. He'd been trying to live that down his whole life by really, being a classically good American, and then being criticized, for this one little 3-minute error, and then he goes in and kills himself. That to me, though, Larry, I'll say this: it wouldn't have made that movie during the war. That scene would not have happened during the war. After the war, people are more willing to kind of entertain some of these notions about how difficult, how stressful, how draining it is to fight a conflict. But during the war, everybody's on board, and it's more talk about mission than it is the strain of the men. That, to me, is a big fault line between wartime movies and post-war movies, and especially in this one.
Well, this is one of the most interesting parts of the movie is this dimension of it, when the flight surgeon is saying, well, Bishop, what he experienced today, that had to cost him something inside. And to me, that's what this movie does better than anything else, is convey what this cost, physically or humanly.
Emotionally. And that's a perfect segue into a topic that we need to talk about, is the morale status of the 8th Air Force in 1942 and 43. And this movie hits on that very, very, very hard and very, very well and accurately. It was not a good morale situation in the 8th Air Force in 1942 and 40. Well, I would say let's say late 42, all the way through the year 1943.
Right, yeah.
It was a really bad situation that these guys found themselves in. They had a less than 10% chance of completing their 25 mission quota. And some of the figures I have here, in particular, the unit that the 918th was modeled after was, of course, the 306 bombardment group. Take 306 times 3 is 918.
Seth, you're a genius. I didn't know that.
No, it's true. It's true.
Never that one completely went over my head.
The 306. This I found this yesterday, and I have to read this verbatim because it's incredible, and it'll give you a really good window. The 306 went overseas with 147 officers who were rated for combat. And of course, this is pilots, co-pilots, bombardiers, and navigators. By April 21st, 1943, the 306 had a total of 57 combat officers left. That includes people who were sent in as replacements. That's a 62% casualty rate. The 367th Bomb Squadron, nicknamed by themselves, by the way, the Clay Pigeons, suffered a staggering 76% casualty rate. After these massive casualties, the remaining 57 flyers in the 306, 57, still had an average of 16 missions left to fly before they completed their tours of duty.
Almost a zero chance of survival, in other words. You're probably talking about a zero chance of survival.
Yeah, it's almost impossible for these guys, and they knew it. They were not fools.
I mean, without turning this into a history lecture, I mean, this is the problem of late 42 and into all the way through 1943. This is a perfect storm for, we say the Air Force. There won't be an Air Force until post-wars, or the U.S. Army Air Forces is the term we should be using now. But there was a perfect storm. They had a doctrine. That is, they had an idea of what kind of war they were going to be fighting in the skies over Europe. The reality had nothing to do with the doctrine that they'd learned. And in fact, there was no reason it should. The doctrine had never been tried out. You never had a chance to try it out. We hear the phrase a couple times in this film. The only way to win this war is through daylight precision bombing. So, that's exactly what it says it is. You would fly over your target cities during the day. American aircraft were equipped with this hyper-modern piece of technology called the Norden bomb sight. It would enable you to drop a bomb into a pickle barrel at 15,000 feet, or whatever the advertisement for it said, whatever the ad copy for it said. And you maybe could do that if you're flying level on a day with no wind and there was no one shooting at you. But when you add all that in, look, when we joined the war, we told the British we're going to bomb during the daylight, and the British said, you're out of your minds.
Yep.
You're absolutely out of your minds. The only way to get over a German defended target is to do it at night. And that's what they had started by bombing during the day, and they had taken heavy losses. They were down to nighttime bombing. But here come the Americans. We always have a better idea. We good old American know-how. We've got this boss new plane, the B-17 Flying Fortress, is bristling with 50 caliber machine guns. Flying together, they can defend themselves even against German fighters. We'll fly over the flak and we'll destroy any fighters that hit us. It's all great. I'm getting excited just saying it out loud. But, of course, not one sentence I uttered in the last, 45 seconds was actually true. It simply didn't work. We didn't have enough bombers. We had a naive idea about how many bombers it would take to destroy a target. We had an unworkable doctrine. And, when you add all that up, I write that up as a historian, not enough bombers, bad doctrine. But in real life, it's the guys at the sharp end of the spear, the poor air crews who have to pay for that. And you send, you hear 5 bombers shot down. Oh, no big deal. It is a big deal. It's a huge crew. It's
50 guys.
It's 50 highly trained personnel. No offense to any of the other services, but I think we could say that it requires the most technical training to be a member of an air crew.
Absolutely.
Maybe tank crew would be close, but I think air crew is more. So I just, again, you're looking here at the perfect storm of it's bad morale because it's a perfect storm of disaster.
That's a good point. You bring up about how long it took to train one of these crew members. I read once an RAF navigator describing what it's like to fly a mission. And he said, imagine doing complex calculus under a staircase in a cupboard in the dark, freezing, and a madman beating at the door with an axe.
Yeah.
So, to me, that's quite a way to fight a war, huh?
Yeah. It's a wild blue yonder, sounds romantic. We even, Air Force has the greatest, I think we'd all agree, the Air Force has the greatest of the service hymns. Off we go into the wild blue yonder. We live in fame or we go down in flames. And that's precisely what was happening. Of course, it was much more the latter, going down in flames, than living in fame at the time.
Absolutely. There's a quote, and like we were talking about the morale issue, and it's, again, depicted extremely, extremely well in this movie. There's a quote that I repeat rather often when talking about the 8th Air Force, and it says, in 1943, to hold a position in the 8th Air Force, it was like holding a ticket to a funeral, your own. So it was morale was a serious issue. You know, you got the depiction of the glory boys and the leather jackets and the Ray-Bans, and to an extent that's true. But these guys were getting slaughtered. And in 42, they were the only Americans. I think that's something that people don't think of. In 1942, they were the only Americans fighting in Europe. That's right. Period. And they were getting pounded. And the reasons why are many, and we could go on for hours and hours, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But again, getting back to the movie, I mean, I think the depiction of the morale issue, which is something that's not talked about very often, is very, very accurate in this film.
I would agree. The piece I really liked in the movie was showing pilots discouraged and not believing in the mission. You know, when Savage has his talk with Bischoff and he say, you know, we need a goal, we need a sense. You know, I just want out. But for me, though, that was so small. I mean, Personally, I would have preferred the movie to focus more on the pilots and co-pilots and the crew than, sensing their fear and the excitement of going on the mission, but also the fear and then coming back and seeing that I've survived, but, you know, my buddy has not. I don't know, that didn't work for me, just to focus on the leadership. And I don't know if it's because, coming back to what Rob was saying, you know, we don't get this interiority from Gregory Peck. I mean, the strongest moment, I would agree, is when, you know, he has this one-on-one talk with either Davenport or with Bishop, and we hear their voice, the people that were, you know, in the action, and just don't see an end to it, and don't see any victory in sight, or any. It's not even at that point a question of victory, any impact. They don't even sense that they're having any impact on the war. Those, for me, were too short and too few.
Yeah, and it's definitely a top-down view that the movie entertains. But
I think I'm going to say it's going to take a while, though, I think, for Hollywood to really give us the bottom-up view of war. And I don't think it's ever really done it as well as it's done top-down, or at least not as much of it. It's easier to deal with a small number of people, I guess, on top. I don't. That's not an excuse, but it is. I think it's reality when we look at the vast majority of Hollywood movies. I think since the end of the war have kind of dealt with sort of more identification, I think, with the officer corps than, from my perspective, than with the manpower.
If you were, making a film of the early days of the, U.S. Army Air Force's strategic bombing campaign of occupied Europe, you really couldn't do it from the bottom up, because these guys were flying 2 or 3 missions and they were done. They were either POWs or they're dead. So, you only really in the movie you only hear rumors of crews, and you really don't see anybody other than Bishop, who's a rank and file pilot.
Well, the scene with the interrogation, I thought was very impactful, because this is very
with Bishop.
Altogether, the different crews after they land, they have to go to the interrogation, and this is this very matter of fact. Yes, we got 40 enemy pilot, and the brain was on the thing, and I had to push him. And for me, this, although it was very factual, you get a good sense of what they went through, and trying to convey that, without getting too emotional. And this is the tension throughout the movie. Can you be empathetic to the people you supervise? Can you are not allowed to have emotion? So let's go back to the question of leadership. How can you be a good leader? And it kind of, for me, the movie tried to create this mass, this group. This is the bombing group. There's no individuality there, and this is what Savage does. He kind of we shuffle. There's no roommate. You don't have a best buddy because you're already dead. So think about that as dead. I don't know if it's if it works for me.
Well, it might be leadership in the military realm. It's probably not the best kind of leadership you would exert in a civilian corporation or anywhere else.
Which is what was done after the war.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie was used, by Intel, by Coca-Cola, as this is the corporate man of the starting in the mid-50s.
Because you got to remember, a lot of those executives were.
Yeah.
Yes.
Combat veterans.
Which is, there's no individuality, there's the mission, there's the goal, which then after the war turned into this is the company and the profit of the company.
I have a question. I like to ask my 3 compadres here. What about the Dean Jagger's role? What is he's the guy who won the actor who won the Academy
Yeah.
Award? Is he the executive officer of the
He I forget what his role is initially. But
He's
he
the
becomes
adjutant, and then he
adjutant.
becomes ground
ground
exec.
exec. That's right.
What,
Yeah.
what about him? He's an interesting character.
I think
He's
he's-
kind of owlish. It looks like a librarian. Doesn't really
Yeah.
look like a warrior type at all.
Got a pair of wings though.
Yeah.
Got a
I
pair
think
of
he
wings.
plays the role of Jimmy the Cricket, like he's the conscience of, of the group commander. I mean, what do you think?
I could agree with that. I mean, he tries to. He's the intermediary
Yeah.
between Davenport initially, and then of course Savage later. Between him and not even the men, but the other elements of the leadership of the group, like Cobb and people like and Bishop and people like that. He tries to. I don't want to say rationalize things, but he tries to humanize some things and to get it through to Savage. I feel anyway. That's just my opinion.
What do you think, Christelle?
I would agree that he's this mediator, translator, but I don't know. I could have done with that. I mean, especially the book-ended scenes with him at the beginning and at the end. I hate when they do that in the movie.
I love it.
I don't see the point of it. I mean, I know, the production story where they found the field that was full of grass. I was like, it's perfect. We're going to start the movie with that, this abandoned airfield, and then we're going to spruce that up, and then we're going to, this is where we use it as a location. But what did they add? Nothing.
Isn't it? Doesn't it take the movie out of the realm of purely like war movie and at least make a stab at being a memory film?
But we have he doesn't say anything, neither at the beginning or at the end. He's obviously a little emotional to find that. He goes there and then it's this very pensive look and he remembers and then we go back and he leaves on his bicycle. I mean, I'm sorry, that didn't add anything at all, so whatever, to the story. There's no characterization. I mean, there's no, I could have done without it.
He's also the fact that he's a World War I vet.
Yes,
He's a
he
retread.
is.
So is this trying to maybe remove the movie from just World War II into more universal lessons about leadership? I'm wrestling with the character too, Christelle. I was asking, whenever I see those bookended, they're very theatrical. And you say, well, what exactly? Why would the director have done that? And I've been trying to think of, give Zanuck the benefit of the doubt. He's a very talented filmmaker, and he can conceive of a film. But I just wonder if we're trying to, those are the lessons of the past. They're the lessons of the far past, of the most recent past, and clearly then they're lessons of the present. I always wonder, these movies are being made in the transition from World War II to Cold War as well, calling Americans to keep those military virtues alive, whatever they may be.
Major Stoval is really Savage's only confidant in the movie, and that's the role he plays.
You let Savage talk?
Well, I mean,
He
I
gives
think
Savage someone to talk to.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, he's also the first one that goes into Savage's camp or try to help him.
Right. Yeah.
So he's convinced by his approach and his method. Originally not, but then he said, okay, and then I'm going to help you. So that's the first person that kind of he takes on this side.
Well, I think what Major Stoval recognizes before anybody else is that Savage is a leader, and what these guys want, they want to be led. They don't want to be. I mean, you got Davenport.
Coddled.
That's right, coddled. Davenport saying, "Oh, it'll be all right. Don't worry about anything." No, you're doing a dangerous job, and you're going to die. A lot of you are going to die, and Savage gives it to him straight. He doesn't sugarcoat it, and I think Stoval recognizes that before anybody else does.
Yes, I agree, and I think, can we talk a little bit about what Savage's method is to restore the group? So he starts with pride, and then he has, I don't know the order, then he has fear, which is mostly a fear of demotion. It's not a fear of dying, because he always told them, you're
already
going to
dead.
die.
Yeah.
And honestly, I couldn't pinpoint exactly the moment in the movie where he convinces the pilot, the crew, that yes, this has worked. I watched, the kind of a third part of the movie, and I was like, okay, he told them that this happened. When did it click? Because we hear that they all withdrew.
Yeah, it happens.
their
It happens
transfer.
off camera. It happens off camera. So
we don't know exactly why.
Yeah.
And I couldn't quite figure it out. Is that the example that he demonstrated he went and flew took risk?
I think it's something that their group could say they did that nobody else did.
Yeah, it's unit
And-
pride.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these guys felt like shit about
Right.
themselves before. When Keith Davenport was in charge, they felt. They did. They felt horrible. They
Yeah.
felt like they didn't have a chance to live. They didn't feel like they had a chance to survive. They didn't feel like they had a chance to succeed. They did think that they were already. They were the hard luck group, quote unquote, and I mean, to an extent, that may be true, but they had no self-confidence at all. They had poor leadership, and they had no self-confidence. And his job, Savage, his job was to instill that confidence in these people and to get them to believe in themselves, A, believe in the mission, B, and believe that they could, if they did things the way that they were supposed to, flew tight formation, didn't break formation, did things by the book, that they could come home, And that's that the scene right before they have the off-camera meeting where Bishop rescinds his transfer request, and then they all do. And, of course, Bishop is elected as the leader of the pilots by all the other pilots. Savage leads them on the raid where there's a radio recall due to bad weather.
Right.
Yeah.
And he, of course, claimed that he didn't hear it. Well, of course he heard it. And that actually happened, too.
Happened all over World War II. If you
Right.
wanted to keep doing something, you just blamed your radio.
Right.
I
Radio
still do
man.
that, Mama.
Yeah, I do it now.
But he claimed that he didn't hear the radio recall, and he led his group over the target. And he even says it. We were the only ones to do it. And he requests, after getting a chew-in from General Pritchard, he says basically, he actually says, I think, you're playing with my money, meaning you're using my aircraft, and for all intents and purposes, they were. Savage says, he takes the chew-in, and then he says, I want a recommendation, for valor for this group, and don't mention the leadership. And to me, that's saying, look at what you guys did. Don't focus on me. Look at what you guys did. And to me personally, that's the ultimate example of leadership.
Isn't it reckless? So he's
sure.
recalled from above to say, no, don't go there. It's dangerous, whatever. This
He's
is
been
not.
preaching tight formation flying.
And he does it anyway, and he's rewarded? I mean, what kind of example of leadership is that? Honestly, the message about the leadership for me was actually quite confusing in the movie.
Maybe I'll push back a little bit on that one, Christelle. Just my study of World War II or any military history, the notion of taking a risk and playing a little bit fast and loose with your superiors' orders and overstepping your bounds. I mean, one way of looking at it is to say it was disobedience, but there's another word the military uses all the time. You've all heard it. It's initiative. He showed initiative. He was trying to make a point with his men, or he thought there was an opportunity. So that part didn't bother me so much. I do agree that since much of this action about the pilots rescinding their resignations kind of happens off camera, you are left, it's an inferential argument. Maybe it makes us think about exactly what happened. Sure would like to have seen another scene. I sure would like to have seen that pilots meeting. Yeah. But like a lot of this movie, everything kind of happens tantalizingly off camera, and you're forced to sit there and say, I wonder what that was all about. Again, the disadvantages, you're left with questions at the end. The advantages are that you're left with questions, makes you think more about the film, perhaps.
And let me just be clear, because one of the things in this movie is that it was based off experiences in the 306. That never happened. Oh. That is one thing that is inaccurate in this movie, and again, it's not trying to be accurate in that respect. It's trying to tell a story, but a lot of the instances in the movie were based off of fact. This was not. This never happened. So.
Field Marshal Rommel, one of the great land commanders of World War II, both in Europe and in North Africa, was famous for not hearing his radio, or talking about a radio malfunction, or asking if he could carry out a reconnaissance in force. No one's ever going to say no to that. Everyone wants to carry out a reconnaissance, and then moving on and doing whatever he wanted. If he had been given a halt command, then moving on with his entire command. So, that part of it didn't ring too falsy to me. I would like to have seen a bit more specificity about exactly how it worked. But I do think that's the lesson the movie's given. That was a big moment. He took this ragtag hard luck unit and showed them that they could achieve a mission if they only, followed the directives.
Followed the doctrine.
Followed the doctrine, which is, we could get into that for the next 20 minutes, whether that's true or not.
Combined with extensive training. Yes. He got them back there. We're going to train every day, which of course they're like, we don't need to do that. We experienced pilot. It's like, no, we're going back to zero, training every day, and I want to see this happen. Yep.
That's when I resign. But they make a big point of that in the movie, though. We're going to practice flying, we're going to practice landing, we're going to practice target bombing, everything we've got.
Because they're arrogant.
Well, yeah, they are. One of the topics that we wanted to talk about was combat mission quotas and maximum effort, and that's a line you hear a lot in this movie: is maximum effort, maximum effort, maximum effort, and it has two two meanings really in this movie. Maximum effort, of course, is sending everybody you can up in the air, and then maximum effort in the terms of Gregory Peck in this movie is he's given everything he's got, and that's when he loses it. Can you comment? Can anybody comment on the on this topic?
Well, I think maximum effort in 1942, 43, it's you can't really throw much up there, you know. And what Rob was saying earlier about, you know, just didn't have enough bombers to carry enough tonnage to destroy these targets, and it's not until the last year of the war that, you know, we're sending 1,200 aircraft after a target, and I mean, we're starting to get to the point where we can actually hurt their petroleum industry or hurt their industry. So one of the messages they talk about in the film is, you know, maybe we won't be around alive to see it, but one day we're going to have the aircraft, we're going to have the air crew, and we're going to have the ability to take it to the Germans.
Daylight precision bombing is the only way to win this war. I've said it twice. I promise to say it one more time before we. It's the Air Force doctrine that's officially being preached in this movie.
I thought maximum effort was also, as the doctor asked at the beginning of the film, is there like a minimum mission or maximum mission we should have them fly before we? So when was that implemented?
I don't know the exact date on that, but when they did go over, when the 8th Air Force first started flying combat missions, which was August 17th, 1942, when they first started flying combat missions against Nazi-occupied Europe, they did not have a quota. I don't know, to answer your question. I don't know.
You fly till you died or the war ended?
That was the theory initially, and then when the casualties started skyrocketing, and the morale started plummeting, there was a mission quota added. When I don't.
Was it 25?
Initially, yes,
Initially,
and that was in 1943. What month? I don't know, but
one of the listeners to this podcast will surely
I
write
guarantee
into this
you.
information.
I guarantee you, and it's just something I don't know. And of course, you know, the first full crew to complete it was, you know, the Memphis Belle, and actually it was Hell's Angels and the 303rd. Everybody says it was Memphis Belle, but it wasn't. Hell's Angels, what was it, 2 days before?
I guess Hell's Angels wasn't PR approved.
Well, they didn't. You know why? And this is a fact, because Hell's Angels completed its 25th 2 days. I think it was 2, maybe 3 days before Memphis Belle did. But William Wyler, who shot the movie Memphis Belle, had more. No kidding. He had more footage of the Belle, and that's why he made the Belle famous.
You know, I'll just weigh in on maximum effort too. It's number of bombers, number of tonnage. You know how big the bombing effort could be. I think it's also what's the maximum effort a human being can give before they crack, as you said. And I think that's really, to me, that's that dual meaning. It's if you're a strategic bombing aficionado or expert, you want to think about it in those ways. I think the movie allows you to do that. But I think it's really more that human equation of what you can give before you crack. We really see that at towards the end of the film with Gregory Peck.
But even at the beginning, I think for me one of the best scene was between the doctor and Gregory Peck, and saying, you know, well, there was an earlier one with Davenport, but then he's like, you know, they all have colds or whatever, you know, they all reported sick, and he's like, well, if they physically can fly, then let them fly. We completely take out of the equation the psychological level, which I'm sure if you have, you know, crew member that have been the equivalent of PTSD, and you put them back, you know, in the bomber, that's not efficient.
Well, they were aware of the physical strains, and eventually they had these camps called flak farms around England where bomber crews who cracked up mentally, they would go there for 2 weeks and, you know, play squash and swim and things like that, and then they would put them back out there. You know,
it's like the basket weaving camp after World War I, where they would send the same
It's
thing.
pretty much the same thing. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They were English estates.
They were really
huge
nice.
English estates and flak farms, flak camps, whatever you want to call them.
You know, when I look at the title of this movie, 12 O'Clock High, I think about what it means. And, of course, it's a German aircraft coming at you head on from altitude, diving into your nose cone and swerving, you know, firing away and then swerving at the last second. Yeah. So we really think about the stresses and strains of combat, which breaks these guys. And I think it's even included in the title, both of the movie and, of course, earlier the book.
And, of course, that plays a scene, or that plays a role in the very opening scene of the movie. When the B-17s first started attacking Europe, the Germans didn't know how to attack them. because they were huge, and they were, well, at the time they were huge, and they were bristling with weapons, and the Germans are kind of sat back in their fighters and went, well, how the hell do we attack this beast? And it was one pilot in particular who came up with the tactic, which was deadly. Egon Meyer, German fighter pilot Egon Meyer, I forget what group he was with. I think it was JG2, I think. But he developed the tactic to attack head-on because he found that was the weakest point of the aircraft. In other words, he wasn't trying to knock out the engines or shoot out the guns. He was trying to kill the pilots. And in the opening scene, that 17 comes and just blasts through that row of tents and belly lands right there on the field. That's an actual occurrence, too. That's Jesse Bishop in the movie. But in reality, it was John Morgan, who was a Medal of Honor recipient for that action. And it's one of the most amazing, to me, it is the most amazing Medal of Honor story of the war.
Had to get the pilot's clutching hands off the controls, had to get his feet off the pedals.
Break his damn leg to get him out of the seat. And in the 17, the pilot and the co-pilot are sitting about as close as you and I are sitting right now.
Which is very close.
Less than, on top of each other.
Just telling the listeners at home.
Less than 2 feet away. I mean, they're literally on top of one another. And these fighters on I think it was July 14th, 15th, something like that, 43, on the raid to Hanover, came at them head on. And one 20-millimeter shell took, the pilot, Campbell, took a 20-millimeter through the head. And it split his head wide open, and it didn't kill him, miraculously, I guess, if you want to say it that way. But it rendered him basically out of his mind. And he got hit. He slumped over the controls. Morgan pulled back on the controls instinctively. And the pilot, thinking in his crazed condition, thinking that Morgan was trying to take his airplane away, started beating the living hell out of him. And for 2 hours, John Morgan fought this guy off with one hand, flew the airplane with the other, still made it to the target, bombed the damn target, turned around and came home. And the top turret gunner got his arm blown off. And just like they show in the movie, I don't know what the navigator is in the movie. I don't know what his name is, but in reality, the navigator's name was Keith Kosk, and he put a parachute on the top turret gunner and threw him out of the plane, and the guy lived. He did survive. He was repatriated in, I think, 44.
There's a lot happening in that opening scene.
Yeah. And it's all, and this I was going to say, it's all based off of fact. So, and I mean, there's really nothing in that opening scene that is dramatized. I mean, that's what happened.
What our American viewers thought of that film at the time they first saw it in 1949. It's a side of the war that many of them may have known personally from what happened to loved ones, but it's not a story I think that that American society, the American public knew widely. I think the mythology of the Air Force at the time was Wild Blue Yonder. These guys were above it all, excitement, modern technology, clean, sterile, efficient, unlike ground pounders and guys in a muddy trench on the ground. But I think that movie, that opening scene in particular, might have been particularly eye-opening for the audience.
It's a punch in the mouth because there's as we kind of touched on earlier, there's this aura of glory with pilots, be they fighter pilots, bomber pilots, whatever. And that scene takes that aura and smashes it to pieces. Because, they look good in their leather jackets, and, they got a little more money than the average GI because of their flight pay. But these guys are getting crushed. And it takes that aura of glory and really puts it in the real moment.
Yeah, the casualty figures are absolutely staggering for the 8th Air Force. What is it, like 26,000 airmen killed over the course of the war?
That's roughly as dangerous as being a Marine, right? In the South Pacific.
Well, more so.
More so. I think the Marines lose about 24,000 and some change or something.
Larry,
like
we'll let you handle the calls from our friends in the U.S. Marine Corps.
but that's a fact. I mean, there were more 8th Air Force crewmen killed in World War II than there were Marines. Geez, there's a lot we can talk about here. One of the things I think we should talk about, we've already talked about leadership, is impact of when a movie was made in relation to the war. You mentioned it earlier. You kind of touched on it briefly. Had this movie been made in 1943, it would have been completely different.
I mean, I'll just kind of pick up on that and then
think about the target audience.
Yeah, just think about what you want Americans to see in the war. During the war, you want them to see films about mission and opportunity and maybe bravery and maybe even glory that can be won in wartime. You don't want to make a movie about pilots getting there or navigators getting their arms blown off or pilots undergoing horrible headshot in the cockpit. That's why I love wartime movies. I do, but there are a couple things. They're kind of sterile with regards to the combat experience for friendly troops, and then they usually paint the enemy in a completely dehumanized way. I mean, Japanese characters in wartime movies usually have all the negative characteristics. But so then there's post-war, and let's say it's time to look back. We all do this in our lives when we're in the middle of something. It's kind of hard to think about it, but it's after the fact. You can give it a lot more thought, and so. I just found this movie to have a navigator who commits suicide, these horrible things that happen in the cockpit. One group commander kind of just loses control of his unit because he's trying to be too nice. Another group commander actually goes into a catatonic fit when he's supposed to get into an aircraft. This movie to me is a classic example of post-war war film. And that's why we love them all, right? We wouldn't be in this room if we didn't love all types of war films. But that's that post-war film, which I think really kind of asks some deep questions and takes you into experiences you might want to hear otherwise.
Yeah, I think 1949 is a big year for that too. You got 12 O'Clock High that comes out that year. You got The Sands of Iwo Jima, and you have Battleground. All of them are, pretty gritty compared to, movie fare during the war itself. A lot of your audience has changed. It's veterans now. It's not family, home front folks. That's right. So I think that's got a lot to do with it.
You think
too.
veterans are going to call BS on a movie more so than folks back home?
They did, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Sands of Iwo is a good movie, but there's a lot of cheese in it. I mean, it's the Duke, but there's a lot of cheese in that movie. But this movie was...
Did you just invoke the Duke?
I love the
Duke. Okay, I just want.
Yeah, I'm not going to bash.
He gets
the Duke.
killed in the end and all.
He does.
Yeah. Spoiler alert!
One of
I'll never do that again in this podcast.
Cut that one out. That's a movie we'll talk about another time.
Yeah,
but anyway,
but
this movie in 12 O'Clock High was praised by a lot of 8th Air Force veterans for being accurate and for portraying what they went through and showing people at home that it wasn't all glory and blue skies and clouds, that there was a lot of blood.
Yes, agree. Still, I want to come back to something that Rob said earlier. I think, for me, what I'm taking in addition to the realistic depiction is also this praise of the group and the need for the individual to disappear for the big cause that I think is still there. And it's 48, 49, it's the Cold War is heating up. Russia has its first atomic bomb. Germany is split in two. China is communist. And we need to make sure that, the spirit of getting together and eliminating individuality for, fighting the enemy, whatever the enemy is going to be. I think there's a little bit of that too. And the trust in the leadership and the little infighting at the bottom level doesn't matter because the leadership is going to know what to do for us, which for me is a little... scary.
I'll throw one more character in because we talked about him earlier. Is it, again, help me here, the adjutant, is this Stoval? Stoval is Dean Jagger, who wins the Academy Award for this film. He will later be the division commander in White Christmas. The old man.
Oh, God,
we love him.
He's also
him.
refused to work with some of the blacklisted film people because they were supposedly... did not want to talk about communists. So he's a staunch anti-communist, too.
But there's another topic we can talk about someday, White Christmas as a Cold War trope.
Yeah.
We'll be here for that one, everyone.
Well, an ultimate question is, and we'll start with Larry on this one. Did you like it, and would you recommend 12 O'Clock High?
I like it.
And why?
I like it, and I absolutely would recommend it. I like it because it's about leadership and, hard decisions being made and guys not shirking from that. And I think it's an example of, what not only what leaders should do, but what people, subordinates really want. And they want to be led. They want to be led by somebody who's assertive, knows what the plan is. And they don't want somebody to, waller back and forth. Well, I know we're not doing any good here, bombing, and I know it's tough, and nobody wants somebody like that. They want somebody who has the answers, or at least fakes it, like they do have the answer.
I want everyone to tape that last comment.
But I mean, I think that's what military want. What's our objective? What do we, what do we have to do? Let's go. And my opinion. I would recommend it. So.
Christelle?
No, I would not recommend it. The reason is because for me it doesn't work as a film. We don't get enough interiority. We don't know what a lot of characters really are going through. I would have preferred to focus on the crew and the leadership. I don't think I'm learning too much from them. If I want to learn about bomber mission, which I think is an important topic, I will recommend 2 documentaries. Target for Today, which is available on YouTube. It's a very good, way better depiction of what we see in the movie. And please take out the bookend with Stoval. It doesn't add anything. So, yeah, doesn't work for me.
What about you, Rob?
I'll be somewhere between Larry and Christelle. I like the movie. I would recommend it. I do like a war film that doesn't really focus on war scenes, on actual scenes of combat, but does try to talk about, I don't know, instead of hardware, you might say this movie is about the software of command, about exactly what kind of things you're supposed to do and say. So I liked it. I see some of the weaknesses in the film. I will be on Christelle's side there. I probably could have done without the bookends. You know, you're watching a 2.5 hour flashback. So that was probably not the most effective scene. I think Dean Jagger completely deserved the Academy Award for this film. I think I asked earlier, and I sense that no one around the table liked his performance or his character as much as I did, but I think he really humanizes this whole thing. So it's not quite so much about sloganeering about leadership. Here's a guy who's been through war before, seen it, and trying to kind of find his way in this new one. So I found his performance to be justified in terms of its award.
No, I love Stoval in the movie. Next to Savage, he's my favorite character in the entire film. As for me, I love this movie. It's one of my very favorite movies ever. And I would recommend it for many reasons, not the least of which is it is an accurate depiction of what these guys in the 8th Air Force were going through in 1942 and 1943, as far as their chances or their feelings of chances of survival and what they went through on a day-to-day basis. And in that respect, I love it. I think it's very accurate, and I would definitely recommend it.
I will add 3 words: daylight, precision, bombing.
One sentence.
I think Rob already did that.
We're gonna go backwards. Rob, one sentence that sums this movie up for you.
It's a movie about leadership.
Not daylight, precision bombing.
Not that. It's a movie about leadership.
Christelle?
Slow, stagey, speechy, outdated film.
I think we needed a verb there.
Yeah.
All right.
Larry?
That's best. I guess "You're Dead Already" is my favorite line in the movie. I mean, that's outstanding. I mean, that's as straight as it gets. That's no BS.
Yeah.
You know, this is what it is.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't pull any punches on there. Yeah.
And you're not going anywhere. You got it. Quickest way home is through Berlin.
Yeah. Or a pine box.
Yeah.
And one of I can't sum it up in a sentence, but one of the things that one of the themes to me in the movie is the average age, the faces in the crowd. They're young people, and the average age in the 8th Air Force, be they gunner or pilot, whatever they may be, combat crews, was between 19 and 22 years old. You had 21, 22-year-old lieutenant colonels, for crying out loud, and I mean,
Unbelievable.
I mean that's I couldn't do that at 22. I knew what I was doing, and damn sure wasn't leaving bottom raids over Germany.
All depends. You've been alive at the time? I totally see you. Totally see you in this role.
Maybe so at that point, and I appreciate the compliment.
Context is everything,
But to me, the best thing from the movie is not the closing line, but it's in the final second to last scene, I think, and it's Stoval. And he summarizes 2 themes of the film for me, and one is the tragic loss of young men in combat, as well as the immeasurable toll on men's psyche. And he says, and I quote, he says, "I got drunk because I'm confused. I was thinking, which is something a man should not do. And all at once I couldn't remember what any of them looked like. I couldn't see their faces, Cobb, Bishop, Wilson, all of them, all of you. They all looked alike, one face, and it was very young, and it confused me."
Right on.
So that'll wrap up this conversation, I think, and think that's a good way to wrap it up. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, listen to our mini episode next week where we will share oral histories from those who were there. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate us and review us on iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible. Our producer, Tessa Jaeger, and our sound engineer, Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.